Join me and my guests as we discuss dice and adventures.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. Okay, guys, I have a fantastic interview coming up. But first, if you want to improve your game mastering skills, if you want to up your dungeon mastering to another level, check out DiceGeeks.com. Just the word dice, just the word geeks, all put together. .com, and you will find my RPG resources that help GMs and DMs up their games. All right, now here's the interview. My guest today is game designer and role player Alvaro Cifuentes. Alvaro, welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for being on the show. And I think I just mispronounced your name. I'm so sorry about that.
Don't worry about it. Coming from Spain, I get it a lot.
Okay. So I appreciate your grace there on that. Thank you so much. Well, I love to ask first-time guests, how did you discover the hobby of tabletop role-playing games?
Well, I come from wargaming. Mm-hmm. So I guess the first time I played a war game was my older brother introduced me to Warhammer Fantasy, probably because none of his friends were there to play with him. And I loved all the whimsical things that you could do in that context. And from there, I played Warhammer Roleplay, and then I moved to D&D, and that was pretty much it, I think.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting that you came into the hobby from wargaming. What do you think it was when, what kind of made you make the jump from, the wargaming into Warhammer fantasy roleplay?
Well, from wargaming, I really liked painting the minis, actually. Mm-hmm. So I guess, I liked wargaming and I like all the rules and presenting your army and all that. But I got really into, I used to go to a hobby store in Madrid where the staff there really create a backstory for the armies. And whenever you rolled, a deathly blow or whatever, they created this whole thing. So I started getting into, the story behind these characters and these soldiers and these amazing universes, and from there, I work in the film industry, and I guess role playing really mixed those two things together. You have, as a storyteller, as a filmmaker, you get that whole background thing and creating worlds and all that, and as a wargaming, you get all the dice rolling and all the classic fantasy realms, if you want to call it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I find it interesting as well, as some of the listeners to the podcast may know, that I studied film when I went to college and was an independent filmmaker for a while. I think it's always interesting to hear how many people play role-playing games and then go on to either be involved in film in some way or to be involved in, writing novels or writing in some capacity, because it just must be that love of storytelling, right?
Yeah, as I told you in the email, I came back to the hobby after a hiatus of my starting working years in the film industry. As you may know, it's a very intense industry. And I was blown away by the amount of people in Hollywood that actually play RPGs or some sort of variety of that. And, after a little while, I had to get surgery, and I stopped working in the film industry for a little while. And RPGs was my sort of go-to when I wanted to get a story out, at least to my friends or to my wife or to whoever, was willing to listen to my session or story or whatever.
Absolutely. And I think you're right, too. I was kind of shocked as well as how many people in the film industry play Dungeons and Dragons. And I guess maybe it's because they're coming into a lot of people we're coming into that age where the people who are now kind of in top positions in Hollywood would have played in the 70s and 80s, because now they're reaching kind of their I guess the pinnacles of their career and stuff. But it is just interesting to see how many people have played, and and how how that affected them and their storytelling, and just really created this love for their storytelling. Now, if you don't mind me asking, what did you do in the film industry?
Well, I started out as an aspiring director, and I ended up working in production. I used to do production coordination, line production in smaller projects, and then my main core body of work, it was in international shoots that come to shoot in Spain. So Spain has a very rich geography from north to south. And then again, relating back to RPGs, we had Middle Ages here. So we still have a lot of ancient castles and really cool sets and locations. So, the Spanish industry is largely based on, service production to shoots.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really fascinating. And of course, yes, that would be, for those of us here in America, we missed out on the Middle Ages. We don't have we don't have that rich history of castles and things like that. So that has got to be really amazing, and I'm sure that they are stunning. Some of the castles and that. Absolutely.
As a kid, I remember just I was really into Warhammer, as I said, and I remember just going, I don't know, with my parents on the weekends and just to have lunch somewhere to this old town and thinking, there could be elves and orcs here. So that's that sort of thing. So it's great. Yeah.
Yeah, that is fantastic. And then you said you moved into Dungeons and Dragons, and you kind of stayed there, even though you had a bit of a break. Is that what you're still playing right now, is Dungeons and Dragons?
Well, right now I'm mainly playing Dice and Adventures, my game, because I'm doing demos and I'm showing it around. But I got really into reading. Actually, I didn't come to D&D straight to play. I got into just old school illustration and I love reading the old the red box manuals and that kind of thing, because you can really see how the language in the text has changed. Before they had to explain what a D20 was, or that sort of thing. So it's I really got into almost archival work, where I just sat hour after hour just reading old school modules and old manuals and OSR and comparing how gameplay works. I really like mechanics. I think that's why one of the reasons I didn't even think about starting my own game, and I was already writing it, because I really like how things work, even like outside of RPGs. Like I like to know how stuff works.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And now, and of course, we're going to dive in and talk about your game some. But before I do that, when you were role playing, were you the dungeon master or the game master, or did you kind of play? But you mentioned you like rules, so I imagine you wanted to tinker with some of the rules.
I've been both, with my brother, with my older, cousins and things like that. I would be a player most of the time, but then I got, I started getting confidence and I started DMing, and that's when I really, really got into it. Even like I remember doing the transition from Warhammer and wanting, the old world. I don't know if you're familiar with Warhammer Fantasy, the old world. I knew everything about the old world, so I wanted to translate that to D&D. because, I think like a lot of, fantasy worlds are sort of based around the same archetypes. But once you get into the lore and the history and you get to know the characters and all that, that's when the chimes start to roll. And that's one thing I really like, is developing worlds.
Yeah, absolutely. That seems to be another thing that a lot of game masters have in common. Before we start talking about your game a little bit more, was there something as a dungeon master or something that you learned that you think would be a good tip for all the dungeon masters out there?
Get your food right, I would say. I've had this more than once where, maybe I've made a mistake with the food I'm serving at a session. Food as in game food, not the food I'm serving to my players, but to my characters. And with my core friends, we play a lot of Western RPGs. Mm-hmm. And I remember one time I said there was this they were in a Asian Chinese environment in a Western. And I don't know why I just said, and in the kitchen you could find potatoes. And one of my friends, which, has relationship with China, he said, potatoes in a Chinese restaurant? What's going on here? And that threw my game off completely. I don't know why I say it. It didn't even matter, but I would say, like, people, it's one thing that happens in film. People are willing to accept the fantasy world, but if you get wrong the real world details, that's when everything starts to go haywire. Like, I don't know, Harry Potter or The Lord of the Rings. If you can make up this amazing story, they will accept that. But once you say something that is wrong from our perspective, you're out.
Yeah. Huh. That's interesting. And it was an interesting example. So I want to clarify. So it was like kind of an Asian Chinese setting, but you were playing a Western though, right?
Yeah, we were playing a Western, and the characters went into a sort of immigrant, parlor that, the backstory of the place was, it was started by people building the railroads and things like that.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was not historically accurate, but that's how the story went. And that's I think for me, that's one of the fun parts of RPGs, is that you can go pretty much wherever you want to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so I think your point is very interesting, that people will accept, a talking sword before they will accept some little detail that's out of place.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that is interesting, but I've seen that happen at my table as well. And I've seen it, like you said, I've seen it happen in movies and TV shows. It's, it's when you get to a place and it's something like, or in a book, the writer, or in a TV show, it's like the director, you just say, okay, well, nobody will care about this one little thing. And it's like, that's the one thing that doesn't work. Right.
That's exactly it. And in the case of the potato, I was just, blabbing away. That wasn't even an important detail that they had to find a certain thing in the kitchen or whatever. I was just saying, a list of ingredients that could go into a hot pot or whatever,
Uh-huh. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I totally understand what you're talking about, because I think there is an importance like that we will accept werewolves and orcs and talking swords, like I said, and all kinds of other things. But if you get some little minute detail that just doesn't work in the real world, like something about a tool or a hammer or a horse or the food, even like you had mentioned, it just throws people out. And that is very interesting. And I think that is something that game masters can definitely keep in the back of their mind and think about, is that the little details sometimes really do matter to help people, buy into the world. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And also, like, usually I like to improvise. When I'm DMing, I like to improvise because I like that challenge, and I like being caught off guard with my players. And so, it's quite possible that I will make those mistakes, but I think my players have also accepted and understand, they understand now how it works, and so, but yeah, I mean, and those little details are very hard to come back from. Like, if someone points out that, getting the players back to the story, I think it's quite challenging because you have to really turn their attention away from that.
Yeah. Yeah. Why do you like improvising when you're running a game?
Well, as I said, I like to go wherever my mind wants to go with RPGs, and more than you've talked about this in the podcast. Usually, business plans don't work out. So you can have this story prepared, and you can have these challenges prepared, and your players are gonna wanna go shopping or whatever, or hit the red button or what, I don't know. And you have to work with that. And it's a good exercise in not only in RPGs, in life. You have to sort of know how to cope with whatever's you're facing. And then it's fun because you can really get to know yourself to see how you improvise and how to. And also I really like about RPGs is that feeling of communion with the people at the table. When you're done with the session, maybe it's 3 a.m. or whatever, mm-hmm. and there's a sense of accomplishment between the people at the table that I've never gotten from movies or reading a book or going to a theater.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I've had that feeling many times as well. There is something about kind of the generation of a story together with your friends there at the table. There's just, and it's hard to explain, but there is that quality. And of course, I've been there at the 2 or 3 a.m. when the session's over, and it's just like, wow, look at that story. Look what we just did.
Yeah.
And
you feel all warm and fuzzy, and you don't want your friends to leave. And it's
yeah, absolutely. And there's just a connection between you and your friends. There's a connection with the story that you don't get from a movie or a TV show or something. If you all gathered around and watched even a great movie or something, there is a different sense of connection when that story, I don't know, when the story just comes together out of the people at the table. It is something else.
Yeah, I think it's something unique to the genre, or to the to RPGs. Also with my group, we're best friends, so we do a lot of things together. We don't know. I don't have a specific RPG group. It's my all-time friend. Mm-hmm. And I remember before, getting my friends into RPGs, and that was hard work, and that's one of the reasons I started writing the game. We like to enjoy, like, whenever you're going, you're driving somewhere, that sort of back and forth banter with the people you like being with. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times we ended up creating a little tale, or a little, this character that we've created goes somewhere, and that some other friend says something else, and you build a story through that. And I think, RPGs do that. And it's also, as a DM, I like to give my players all the range they want, because DMs can create this amazing world, but it's their perspective, and players add a lot to it and enrich a lot. Like, every person in the world is an individual and adds their own little thing to their environment or to their family or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was one thing for me, coming from a time when I would try to, almost prepare everything, that letting my players, have input into the world, into the setting, really opened things up and made the hobby dynamic for me again, right? Because for a while it seemed like I just knew what the players were going to do. I knew everything about the world. I knew these things. And once I started letting them come up with things, not only did it take a ton of prep off of my plate, but it just also made things more dynamic, because I think you're absolutely right. People just add their own little unique kind of spark of creativity to something, and they come up with something that, you would just not have thought of. So, maybe you have the base idea and you kind of set out, oh, I was thinking of a setting, something like this. Well, somebody else is going to say, well, what about this? And it's just going to take on a whole nother character because they've added something that you couldn't have thought of. So I think that's great.
Yeah, and like for example, in my games, right, to go back to it, I include not at your level, of course, but I include a small pamphlet of generators of random tables, and I give out mission generators. But these missions, they don't have anything specific on them. It's just to get your juices flowing and your mind working, and and maybe all you get from the generator is rescue somewhere at in a mountain or something like that. But that's enough for the group to sort of make their own thing. And my game, as I told you, has no lore, and so it's built out of the archetypes that we have as a society, on fantasy, classic fantasy, orcs and elves, Western, sci-fi, Star Wars. I know you're a big fan of Star Wars. Mm-hmm. And, so I think just with the archetypes, this is not the 1980s anymore. You don't have to explain people what, a sort of classic fantasy world is. They sort of know it. And I think that's enough for players to get into the hobby.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. I think with some of the high profile movies like Lord of the Rings movies and some other TV shows and things that, we don't have to explain like, oh, but they're wearing armor and they're these things called orcs. Like pretty much most everybody gets those concepts now. But yeah.
No, which is cool because like in the Beg Me D&D books, like they would explain all of this in a very detailed manner, and it's funny to think like how naive they thought the readers were, mm-hmm. or was it really necessary to do this because there was no reference.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that's right. Yeah. Looking back, we could say, oh, why are they taking such time to explain all this? Well, we didn't have that reference. I mean, when I was 9 and I first started playing Dungeons and Dragons, I mean, my reference was the old kind of Rankin Bass, the Hobbit movie and the Return of the King animated movie, right? Because of course I hadn't read Lord of the Rings when I was 9.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So I remembered, and then there was a Lord of the Rings animated movie too, I think that I had seen. And I think Black Cauldron came out sometime in there as well. And so it's like I had some of those references. So I was able to think about that. But I mean, those were pretty obscure references, compared to, Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movies, right?
Huge,
huge global things.
My reference growing up was Willow, the movie.
Oh, yes.
So, before I found Tolkien, before I found, all this, I had already watched Willow, 170 times probably at my neighbor's house. And also like with Willow specifically, what I liked about it is it's a fantasy world, but there's a little whimsy in it. There's a little fun, thing that I think, I love Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, but sometimes it gets a bit too serious. Mm-hmm. And I remember watching old BBC documentaries, like from the 60s and things like that. And there was one where they interviewed college students, what did they like about Tolkien? And a lot of them said, with their 60s paste glasses and turtlenecks, they would say, it's fun because it's a world, it's a fantasy world, and there's orcs and wizards and all this, but there's also pubs and you can go have a beer and you can, and I that stuck to me. Like, I like the fun in this fantasy world and how whimsical it can be. Warhammer, Games Workshop, Blood Bowl, football with, orcs and elves and goblins and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And Willow was one of the movies that I watched quite a bit too. And I forget about it because it did come along a little bit later after I had started playing, but that was one of the ones I could point to, some friends too, and say, oh, look, it's kind of like this. But yeah, we didn't have many examples of that. So that is really interesting. But now, I definitely want to talk about your game more. So your game is Dice and Adventures. You told us a little, like you don't have any lore. Well, why don't you kind of give us the basic idea of your game, and then we'll talk a bit more about the rules and such.
Well, there's a lot of one-page games. There's a lot of really small, tiny rule sets. And I think one of the things that was hard for me, during my teen years, for example, was to get people that weren't already into the hobby, whether it's D&D or Warhammer or, Warhammer 40K, whatever it was, to get those people that were my good friends and I wanted to spend time with them to play one of these things. And, when I got back to the hobby, the internet, had exploded, and you had all sorts of, independent publishers and, Drive-Thru RPG and, all these amazing things that have happened since I left the hobby. And I wanted to play with my friends that never got to play. And that's when I started writing the rules. But I knew my friends weren't going to buy into, having to prepare a character, in a deep way, or having to read, at least some of the rule sets. And so I said, let's go bare bones, because as we said, as a collective, we already know what a fantasy world is. We already know what a sci-fi world is. We already know what a retro world is. Thanks to Stranger Things, for example, all of these things come in, into a nice little package that you can point to Netflix, and that's pretty much it for people. And so I focused on ease of play, Dice and Adventures. I wanted to reference Dungeons and Dragons, of course, with the name, but because I think that's like the core example that everybody knows. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to, be as clear and as blunt as possible. This activity involves dice and adventures. That's pretty much it. So, I started writing the Western version of the game first, because my friends are into Westerns. Mm-hmm. And then through developing those rules, I saw that I could translate it to easily and quickly to the different universes. That's what, how I call it, the different universes. So you have 6 universes right now, which is fantasy, classic fantasy, Western sci-fi, again, planets, spaceships, stars, things like that. Retro, to sort of get you into the Goonies or, Stranger Things or something like that. Pirates, a sort of Pirates of the Caribbean or something like that. And then I have a Nouveau universe, which is sort of the turn of the century, kind of 1900s. We're starting to get motor vehicles. We're starting, and you can do a sort of, pulpy thing. You can even go as far as Sherlock Holmes or something like that. And the cool thing about the game is that it's really, really easy to get people into it, because it's only 4 pages long, but it has enough character development to to get you want to play more and, get that character to a better place, I guess.
Mm-hmm. No, it sounds really interesting. I'm kind of fascinated why you chose a couple of those settings, the Nouveau setting and
I'm a big Sherlock Holmes fan. Yeah. That's the whole. But then I said, it's Sherlock Holmes. It's a bit back to. So I wanted to get maybe do a little reference, because I also know that probably the person that buys my game is already a veteran DM that wants to get his wife into RPGs for the first time, something like that. So I wanted to do a little notch to Call of Cthulhu or something like that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. No, it makes perfect sense, and it is a great time period because the world was really in flux as well, and so it makes sense that you can add a lot of elements in there. So that's really interesting. Maybe help kind of break it down. You said it's only 4 pages. What is some of your base mechanics in that?
Well, you get to roll for you. I didn't want to use all the classic, RPG dice set. So because I saw that with people that had never played RPGs before, giving them 10 or 7 different dice was melting their brain a bit. They didn't know which which was a D20. They didn't know which was a D4. So I chose to reduce that to 3 dice. So you get a little of the feeling of that, but it's not as overwhelming as it could be. So you have a D12, a D6, and a D4, and you get to roll. The core mechanics is basically you have a set of abilities or stats, which are reminiscent of the classic stats. So you have power, control, analysis, wisdom, empathy, and cunning. And you roll 3d12, and you have to get at least 2d12, 2 successful d12 to accomplish whatever you're trying to do. I don't know if I'm being clear or not, but
so you roll 3d12, but you need to get what to be successful?
You roll 3d12 in a normal situation. You would roll 3d12, and if you get 2d12, 2 successful d12, for instance, if your stat number is 6, if your control stat number is 6, you have to get 2 6s, and then you accomplish whatever you want to do.
Got it.
And it's I wanted it to be very basic and very straightforward. I didn't want to get into a specific rule for every little thing that you could do in the game. So I needed a very broad mechanic. Mm-hmm. And then depending on the difficulty of the task, the DM can ask you to roll 3 dice. That's a normal situation. 2 dice, that's difficult situation. 4 dice, that's a really easy situation or action that you want to perform. Mechanics are really basic, but I just wanted to sort of organize everything so that it's really easy to understand the flow of a session.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, it sounds really good, and I can definitely see why you were saying you wanted to kind of slim things down to bring in some friends who maybe didn't play and things like that.
Also, something I try to pay attention to is the use of language in the rule set. So I try to use common everyday words. Mm-hmm. So I would for magic, I wouldn't use mana or, there's other games that use a more, a cooler name probably. I just go with magic or,
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I know some games try to do that so they can have, set aside game terms and not look like they're copying from somebody else and stuff. But I think sometimes a little bit more straightforward would be helpful in some games. So no, I totally understand that. Well, of course, one thing about role-playing games is what kind of characters can I make?
Well, in the different universes, the fantasy, pirates, retro, western, there's a set of profiles, character profiles that you can choose from, and those have different advantages. So, as I said, the normal situation roll would be 3d12, and the DM can ask you to roll less or roll more. Let's go with in the fantasy universe, the warrior, for example, has an extra d12 with a weapon of his choice. So, for instance, when you're creating the character, and you say, okay, I want a D12, I want to be a warrior and get a D12 on a sword. Every time you use that sword, you get that extra D12. So you can get, you can get the DM a bit of guard when he shows you this amazing foe that he's created. You have that little advantage. But it's really like everything in the game has to be at least one or two sentences long. Like the rule set is very slim, so that also once you get to play and as a DM, you know everything. There's no use of there's no semantic confusion, or there's no I don't know, sentence construction that maybe makes the rule seen in a different way. I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but I try to be as straightforward as possible, and rules are very, very slim, one or two sentences that explain what you have to do, and that's pretty much it. And then also what I wanted to do, when you buy the game through DriveThruRPG, for example, you get a bunch of PDFs, but it's not just so that you print them out, but you get a box that you cut out and you make your little box. You get a DM screen that you cut out and you make your little DM screen. So also, that you have the experience that, you probably had when you were a kid, of gathering around a table with the DM screen and, the DM rolling dice behind the DM screen, all that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. No, it sounds fantastic. And then for the characters in that, could you go over the kind of the attributes again?
So, it's basically, it's the basic, I think, generic RPG fantasy attributes, which is power, which represents strength and resistance and that sort of thing. Control, that it has to do with dexterity and execution. And analysis, I would say, your perception, wisdom, that's about learning and, the culture you have of the world or the environment that you're investigating. Empathy, that has to do with the way you read people. Mm-hmm. And treat people, but also the way people read you. So maybe you're high on empathy, and you walk into a room, and the people read that you are, a sort of noble person or a noble character, or you have goodwill behind you. And then cunning, which also acts in that sort of way, where the DM can use it, to your advantage or against you, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's really good. And I like how you keep it simple like that with just a few of them.
And also, like, character creation is 5 minutes. So it's really easy to, get people playing in, half an hour or whatever. You just sit them around a table and make them create a character in 5 minutes, which is really, really easy, because there's no player's manual to read and to understand or to get info from. It's just very straightforward.
Okay. And now when you make characters, do you assign certain things to some of those different attributes, or do they come just from the profiles?
The profiles really give you a little advantage over another profile. So, as we said, the warrior has an plus 1d12 on a weapon of his choice, but I don't know, the doctor, there's that doctor character. I don't want to put clerics in the game. I don't want to get religion mixed in any way. The doctor knows how to heal, so it's a very straightforward archetypical construction. The doctor heals, the warrior fights, that sort of thing, which I think it's cool because it goes back to another era, I think. But at the same time, when you're creating the character, it's pretty much all, either a random roll of a dice or, a very, very small choice. Like, for example, when you create a character, you choose an objective for that character, and there's 6 objectives. And when you fulfill those objectives through a series of missions or a campaign or whatever, you get granted certain things that to better your character.
Okay. No, that's interesting. So advancement is handled kind of like that?
Advancement is handled through, leveling up. And when you level up, you can, in a very video gamey sort of way, you recover all your lives, or you can tweak an ability, at a certain number. And also through reading, and this is a notch to real life, your character can also advance through reading manuals. So if your character, again, it's 4 pages long. So I needed a way to make the characters richer, but I couldn't give you a table of things that everybody could do in 6 different universes or environments. And, so what I did is, if you want to better your character, you go to the library, buy yourself a bunch of manuals. Do you want to speak Elvish? Buy an Elvish manual and you can do it that way. Or, do you want to know how to shoot a gun? Get a manual on guns, and there's nothing, there's no lore. So really it's on the DM to, role play that situation. Maybe the character goes into a shop and he says, hey, do you have any books on, I don't know, mushrooms? And if I want to know about mushrooms because we have a mission and we're going to mushroom, and then, and the DM will say, okay, yeah, I have cooking mushrooms. I have, psychedelics, and I have the amazing mushroom world of, whatever. So it's really one of the things that I really like as a DM is to create, and as that also fascinated me in film is pieces of literature that are created for that story. Mm-hmm. So like in The Ninth Gate, in the movie, they created books. In Rosemary's Baby, again, same thing. That sort of thing. I really think that's really cool. So the DM this way can sort of do it. If you don't want to do it and you don't want to get into that, you can just say, okay, yeah, you have a manual on swords or whatever, and that's pretty much it. But I like to give a title and the author and what the book's about and all that.
Nice. Oh, I love that. I love that detail, though. I think that's awesome. And now you did mention some random tables, which are near and dear to my heart, obviously. So you mixed in a few to get people kind of get started on some quests or on some adventures, right?
Yeah, when you buy the game, you buy the core rules that comes with a box, and then it comes with a little pamphlet that is a generator to get you started. So you have like mission generators, you have NPC generators. Again, this is not a huge. It's just a 1-page pamphlet. It's not like your random tables or a long PDF with 20 pages of tables. It's just a pamphlet, but it's enough to get you going. You have travel events, and then you have something that I really like, which is called the Monster Machine. And it's just a way to build, any kind of monster. You have, I don't know, you have the example I give in the pamphlet is, you can create a smiling zombie lizard that has feathers. Something like that. But you can have, maybe the monster hungry, maybe the monster's not smart. I think it's enough to make your story interesting, but that have that sense of, whimsical that we were talking about, that, gets everybody off guard when you have, you've created this amazing campaign and it's really serious and everybody's, really sad and it's all gloomy and stuff. And then you have this ridiculous monster appear,
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. Yeah.
Also, when you, as I said, when you buy the game, you have the core rules, and then you buy this universes separately, and in each universe you have the rules for that universe. So you get the profiles we were talking about, a bunch of weapons, specific abilities that you have in that universe, and then you get 2 adventures: an introductory solo adventure, because I've been a solo, player, and through the pandemic, for example, a lot of people had to play by them, and entertain the family in some way, and maybe after in a quiet Sunday afternoon, you have nothing to do and you want to live a little micro adventure, so I give you, with each universe, I give you a solo adventure to get you, to get you to learn the rules. Mm-hmm. And then I give you your first group adventure. Again, it's all in pamphlets, so it's very succinct, and it's very, just enough information to sort of get you rolling.
Yeah. No, that's great. And you're right. A lot of people had to at least change something or go solo. And so during the pandemic and all that. So that is really neat that you included that. Alvaro, where can people find Dice and Adventures?
Well, they can find Dice and Adventure at Drive-Thru RPG, searching for Browy Games. At browygames.com, Instagram, Facebook, I'm trying to be everywhere. And as much as this is a hobby, I want to expand the world, create new adventures, and maybe more universes. I don't know about that, but and certainly more generators, and so I want to expand the world in that way. So look us up every now and then, because there's probably new things.
Well, awesome. And of course, I will put a link to Dice and Adventures in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. I will put a link there to Drive-Thru RPG, so anybody who is listening right now can head over there and check it out pretty easily. Well, Alvaro, it was a pleasure to have you on the show. I think it was a very nice conversation. I learned some very interesting things, and your game seems like a ton of fun. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me. It was great. I had a lot of fun.
All right, there you have it, guys. I really hope you enjoyed my conversation with Alvaro today. If you want to check out more of his work, please head over to dicegeeks.com. Check out the links in the show notes. All right, guys, if you want some free stuff, head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You will get all kinds of free PDFs. Plus, you'll get an email update from me every Friday letting you know what is going on here in the world of Dice Geeks. All right, guys, I really appreciate you listening to the show. It is so awesome that you take a time out of your week to listen to me and my awesome, awesome guests. I thank you so much, and until next Wednesday, keep gaming!